interesting. But Professor, so almost everyone knows that sugar and ultra-processed foods and vegetable oils is terrible for you. But why is it still being pushed? Can you give us some idea of how pharmaceutical companies and sugar companies are so dominant that it's difficult to take them head on?
Yeah, well, I think my experience was a typical example that I was expelled from my university, and ultimately I had to resign from the profession so that I could have a freedom of speaking to you. Because if I hadn't, I wouldn't be able to speak to you, because I would have been reported again for being a medical doctor, expressing misinformation and so on and so forth. And what happened to me was that I was targeted by industry, by the food industry. And I suspect the pharmaceutical industry was also involved. And they are so powerful because they control all the medical schools around the world. Now, you must listen to me carefully that is the case. If you are a medical school, it doesn't matter if you're North America, Europe, Asia, and you have aspirations. You want to be known as world class, to compete with Harvard and Yale and Stanford. Well, then you have to get money. And the only people who've got money are the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry. So you have to get funded. Your research has to be funded by them. And the moment you're funded by them, you've sold out and you actually start to work for them. And I know because I did that. I worked for the carbohydrate industry for many years, and we did some great research. But as long as we were promoting carbohydrate consumption during exercise, that was fine. The moment I said I don't believe in it anymore, I lost all my funding, just like that. Overnight, all went, and my career wound down. Fortunately, it's picked up again for various reasons. But that's what happens. And so when you listen, for example, let's just take the COVID-19 story. Why is it that South Africans, like the rest of the world, are only getting one side of the story? Only one side. Why aren't you getting both sides? There was a person on Twitter, or on YouTube, I should say, a famous South African with legal training. And he said, but why don't we bring all the evidence together so we can hear it? So the answer is the one side's being selected out. It's being censored. And that's what's happening with nutrition. And the same with the pharmaceutical industry. It's all being censored, and it's being censored right at the top. And that's the problem. And the great universities, Harvard, Stanford, Yale, have the most conflicted scientists, So we say, this guy's a professor of medicine at Harvard. He must know what he's talking about. Unfortunately not, because he's so conflicted that he can only give you one piece of the truth. He cannot say that carbohydrates cause cancer or carbohydrates cause heart disease, because he will lose his job immediately. He cannot say, for example, that diabetes is a reversible condition, that the most prominent disease in the world today is diabetes. It's not COVID-19, it's diabetes. And diabetes is a behavioral choice which is completely preventable by dietary choices. Now, there's no professor of medicine anywhere in the world who can say that, because the moment he says that, his career is ended. It's professional suicide to say that. I can say it because I'm no longer in the profession and I've got all the evidence. But so that's the problem. So the reason why this diet is sustained is because the politicians and the academics are controlled by industry, and they can't say anything about changing anything that will affect the profits of the pharmaceutical industry or the food industry.
Mm. Yeah, we've had a few doctors and professors on WorldView that have lost their jobs because they took on the pharmaceutical companies head on. And yeah, that interview with Chief Justice Mogoeng was very interesting. Yeah. He's a very charismatic and articulate person.
There you go.
But Professor, don't you think part of the problem is accreditation and that title of Professor and Doctor, MD? Because whoever has a monopoly on that training gets to decide what you learn. So isn't that part of the problem, that we need to move away from that sort of education?
Oh yeah, so that we have to develop a whole new way of training. Absolutely, education has been completely changed. It must be totally independent of the pharmaceutical industry and the food industry. So if I was professor of medicine at the University of Cape Town, for example, or any Free State, any university with a medical school, I have two choices. I can either bankrupt my university Faculty of Health Sciences by saying, we will no longer support the pharmaceutical industry. We will no longer support big food. And so the faculty will collapse. Or I can say, we'll continue to do exactly what we're doing and we will harm South Africans' health. That's the choice. So how long that lasts for, I don't know. All I can say is that this COVID thing has exposed the dishonesty of the profession. And the public will slowly begin to realize that they were told a bunch of lies. And many people lost their jobs and their futures and many other things because of the lies that were supplied by the medical profession. And so they will start to say, well, if the person could lie about COVID-19, maybe they're lying about the statin drugs that I'm meant to be taking. Maybe they're lying about the insulin that I need to treat my diabetes. Maybe they're lying about all the vaccinations that children need to take. And then it's time that we develop a new discipline, which is real health. You see, medicine's got nothing to do with health. Absolutely nothing to do with health. We must just make one distinction. Surgery, obstetrics and gynecology, trauma are unbelievable. They are the best in the world. There's nothing that can touch them. If you're in a car accident, you better get to a hospital and have a good surgeon look after you, because these men are and women are brilliant. And the anesthetists are astonishing. And they the product of 200 years of increased knowledge in medicine. They are utterly brilliant and they need to be praised for what they do. They are astonishing. They make our lives much more safe and healthy every day. But when it comes to chronic disease, which is diabetes, heart disease, the profession is utterly hopeless because it doesn't treat the real cause, which is a nutritional basis. Instead, it asks you to take these pills, which don't help you. So we must make that distinction, and that health has got nothing to do with medicine. It's all about your behavior choices and your nutritional choices. And that is not taught at medical schools. We're taught, this is the diagnosis, this is the treatment, it's these pills. Don't talk to the patient. Don't ask them how much exercise they do, what they eat, etc., how many hours a night they sleep, what's their psychological stresses. We don't ask those questions because we don't have the time to address them. But the new profession will look at that and will teach people as a totality. It'll treat people as a totality.
I recently spoke to a doctor and he made a very interesting observation that so-called chronic illnesses are just bad eating patterns transferred from the parents to the children. That's what a chronic illness really is. That's why depression and anxiety or whatever is in the family, because the family eats wrong.
Yeah, exactly. But we live in this food environment which is so toxic. And I mean, as we know, if you go to the supermarket, there's only a couple of places where you'll want to select your food. You won't go to the central aisles where there's all the cereals and grains and the breads and the high sugary drinks. That you don't want those. So, but it's difficult because it's cheaper to eat that way, or it's apparently cheaper to eat that way, because you don't understand what the long-term costs in terms of poor health and lost opportunity, work opportunities and so on. That's not part of what you factor in.